Hey folks, Randy Newberg here. Welcome to another episode of Hunt Talk Radio. Today I've got a wonderful guest, a guy I've been trying to corner now for about a year. We were in Kalispell together earlier this summer, and he's a busy man, so I couldn't hardly do it there. But he made the mistake of traveling through Bozeman, Montana last night, and I went and listened to him give his presentation. And I said, Tony... His name's Tony Bynum, so now most of you already know him, but you aren't getting out of town without us doing a podcast. So with me today is probably, if you don't know Tony, through his advocacy for public lands, through his photographic work more than anything, I'd say, you will when this podcast is done. So Tony, thanks for being here this morning.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, and I'm actually glad I'm in Bozeman. I always want to come down here, and I never get the chance. It seems like I'm either going somewhere else or, I blow by Bozeman, but I'm actually glad to be here. So I like this little town, and so I'm happy to be on your show.
Great. Well, thanks. And for those of you who don't know Tony, and I'm sure most of you do, his images are some of the most capturing, I don't even know what the right word is to explain it, but if you want to see the essence of wild, am I saying that right, Tony? Do you feel comfortable if I say that?
Yeah.
Your images, your live animal images, your large landscape images that I see on magazine covers tell me this guy understands what my vision of the wild, the natural world is. Mm-hmm. And so Tony's been all over the place. His stuff has occurred in all kinds of publications, websites, but we're going to get into a really good conversation because, like me, Tony's a pretty vocal public land advocate. Mm-hmm. And he's also involved with some of the professional outdoor media groups. And I'm going to quickly run through our sponsors of this podcast, and then Tony and I are going to jump into this, and I think you're going to have a good time listening to this one. Tony's a modest guy, so my job is to get some of that modesty pulled out of Tony. So, but before we get going, I want to just thank the great folks at Orion Coolers. You guys have heard me talk about them. You see them in the TV show. You see them out on our Hunt Talk website. And go to orioncoolers.com, and I can assure you that they will be the best cooler you can find. That's all I have to say. Yeah, they're some of the funkiest colors you're going to find. That's how you'll identify them. But once you start using them, you will know that it's not the color. It's the quality and the performance of the cooler. The other group that, and I'm getting ready to launch a new season here, going out filming starting next week. And the first hunt I'm on is because of this group called GoHunt.com. They have a service called The Insider, and it has some amazing information in there. And this hunt I'm doing in Utah, I would not have known about if I hadn't been using their insider service. So right now, if you go to gohunt.com/hunt talk, HUNTTALK, they're giving everybody a 30-day free trial of the insider service. And if you use it, I'm sure that after the 30 days are up, you're going to want to keep it. We're talking research of units, state by state, how the drawing systems work, the draw odds, the trophy quality, the success rates, the you name it, it's there. So gohunt.com/hunt talk and click on the free trial, and you're going to be set up for at least 30 days. And my guess would be you may as well just buy the lifetime membership. I don't even know if they have a lifetime membership. I think it's annual, but anyhow. And then lastly is a product, you've seen me using it in the show since they started. It's Onyx Maps. They make the GPS chips you see in my Garmin GPS, and now they have this really cool service. I've been using the beta platform of what's called the Hunt app. I've had it all summer. I've been playing around with it, and now we are talking about the new era of GPS. It converts your cell phone, your smartphone, into pretty much everything you'd want in your GPS and more. And the integration I've been playing with between my desktop, my smartphone, and everything else, building my own maps, adding layers, taking away layers, you're going to want to check that out. So go to onxmaps.com, and if you use the promo code RANDY, RANDY 16, the number 1 and number 6, so Randy 16, that promo code right now will get you 20% off any of their app products. And we're just talking about the Hunt app, and I'm sure you're going to like it. So anyhow, with that out of the way, Tony, where do we even start? How does it... From a background, I didn't know. Last night I was listening to you tell the story. I had no idea that you were like this country boy from Walla Walla, Washington. I thought you were like born and raised, always lived in East Glacier, Montana.
Yeah, I wish. No, actually. How'd you get to East Glacier from Walla Walla? And pretty classic story, I think. I mean, I was born in Walla Walla and kind of that's where I was initiated, I think, best into the outdoors through my grandfather, my dad, my uncles, and fishing. I think, as a young person, when you're just traveling around with your grandfather and your dad, you're just out there to have fun.
Oh yeah,
like that's what it's all about. It's like you don't really pay attention to where or when or how. It's like, we're gonna go and we're gonna get wet and cold and have fun. And so, I was there for a while. My parents decided they wanted to do different things with their lives, and so I got a little bit uprooted there and moved to Olympia, Washington, with my mother. But was back working in the summers in Walla Walla on a wheat ranch there. College came around at some point, and I moved to Ellensburg, Washington, and spent 10 years there working on...
Is that where Central Washington?
Central Washington University.
Okay.
Yeah, I ended up with a master's degree in science from Central Washington University, but in the meantime, I was a fly fishing guide, a hunting guide, a prep cook, a fence fixer. I mean, at one time I was working on four different ranches at the same time. So I'd go from one to the next and cut hay and rope cows, and like it was crazy. And because of that, was exposed to a lot of different aspects of the outdoors, not just public lands, but private lands as well. And right. I think there's an important connection that needs to be at least understood at some point. We may talk about that, we may not, but it is an important aspect of the public land scenario.
Oh yeah,
the private land
conservation is as important as the public land conservation.
Yeah. So, but in the midst of that, one thing happened that I think is critical to how come I have made a career, I say, out of the environment, out of public lands, and whether it's air or water, and the work that I've done prior to becoming a photographer. I in high school I'd had some really rough times, and I felt like. At one point there, I didn't know if I was even going to make it out of school. Yeah, I'd been kicked out for fighting, and and it was like, what am I doing, right? And I didn't really understand it, and so I talked to my mom about it, and we came up with some solutions I think that worked. But I got kicked out of school, and as it was, I was already going on an elk hunt, it was already planned.
So the week you get expelled from school, it's convenient that you got an elk hunt lined up.
Yeah, and I'm not reminding my mom of this as I'm sitting there talking to the principal, who's looking at me like he's, I'm really in trouble, and I'm thinking, please don't kick me out next week. And all of a sudden it's like, okay. So I leave with a smile on my face, and I'm, sorry, I didn't mean to do whatever. But so I go on this elk hunt the next week. I drive from, at that time, Olympia. I'm 17 years old. I jump in my 1969 or 70 Toyota Land Cruiser that I bought and built, drive it all the way back to the Blue Mountains.
Southeast Washington. So you're going from the coast to the southeast Palouse area.
To go on this elk hunt. And, as it turns out, I felt a lot better when I got done with that elk hunt. And so I was sort of refocused. I went back to school. That later, I graduated from high school, and I still wasn't really adjusted quite right yet. So I ended up on a 30-day, 25-day experience mountaineering in the Olympics, or excuse me, not the Olympics, the North Cascades in Washington State.
Way north. Right up on the Canadian border there.
Right.
Yeah.
And again, this is public land access. I mean, this is like, I still hadn't really made the connection. I was, because it was just assumed you could just go do stuff.
Yeah.
Like there was no, you didn't stop and look at the map and go, where, like we do now, right?
Right.
Where's the public land so I can go hunting? It still hadn't occurred to me that I needed to ever think about that. You just went and did stuff.
Yeah.
So anyway, off we went. And I learned some things in that experience that changed the way I view things as well. So fast forward, go to college, build a career, spent a couple years in Washington, D.C., working for the Environmental Protection Agency, which, I mean, love them or hate them, it's sort of a weird situation.
Yeah.
If I say that to people in my business and they look at me like I'm like from Mars.
Yeah, you're the enemy. Where'd you come from?
Yeah. and what bothers me about that is that you don't go look at the cops that way, the police.
Right.
These are the environmental police.
Right.
Why do we look at them and say, oh, you're really bad. Like, you guys are the worst. It's like, they're no different than any other cop. The Congress tells them, here's what you need to do, and they go out and they enforce it.
Right. Yeah, they're not the ones writing the law.
Yeah, why are you mad at me when I showed up as a permit writer to say, there's all these rules Congress wants us to enact, and we've got all this process now, and you're violating these laws, and I'm the bad guy.
Yeah. No,
EPA's not the bad guy. Talk to Congress.
Right.
If you don't like it,
go to Congress.
Go to Congress.
They are the feds. That's what I don't know how many times people have heard on this podcast because I get frustrated when people say the damn feds. The damn feds is Congress.
Yeah.
I don't care if it's the EPA like you're talking about or whoever, but anyhow, continue.
Yeah.
So somehow you end up in East Glacier.
Yeah, so I ended up in East Glacier. I went back.
Is there a woman involved?
There was, and that's there always is. When you end up moving someplace, when you start to become a little more mature, it's usually because of a woman
or a man. I mean, if
I don't know where you.
No, let me restate that for the female listeners. It could be a man, and
okay.
Let's not go there.
Fair enough. Okay, so
I'm sorry, Tony. I completely ran us in the ditch here. We're not even 10 minutes into the podcast, and I've already taken us off the tracks. But
we're not going that liberal on this show quite yet.
Right.
But
no, we're not.
Okay, no.
We're just going to be who we are.
Yeah. So, I met this woman and ended up, she was from East Glacier Park, Montana, which maybe most of you probably don't know that is on the Blackfeet Indian Reservation, entirely within the boundaries of the reservation. And so my daughter, who is 14 now, was born just before I moved to Browning, Montana is where I was living. I'm in East Glacier now. They're all really close together. It's all on the reservation. And so that's how I ended up there. And once I got there, I mean, it was sort of like that was the point at which I changed my career from being in the professional science world, where I was a senior scientist with EPA. I was also an assistant to the administrator on Indian policy. And so I get back and quit that job in August of 2001, just before 9/11. And obviously I didn't know that was going to happen, but I'm just grateful that I was able to get out of that city before that went down. And I lived right by the one of the buildings there by the Pentagon, and it was, whatever. That's a whole nother story. But so I get done with that. The day I gave my 2-week notice, and Friday I get done at like 2:00 in the afternoon, and by 3:30 I've got my pickup and my trailer loaded, and I'm headed out. And I didn't stop driving until I got to Montana. Really? I mean, literally I just knuckled under and went. And so so I worked for a little bit of time there for a couple of different consulting firms, because that's what happens. Like if you're in the government at that level, when you leave,
that's the good transition.
Yeah, the private guys want to talk to you because where the money's at, right?
Exactly. You know where the holes are through the fence, so to speak.
So I worked for few years for a consulting firm and managed some federal contracts, basically as a scientist. I quit that job when it became obvious that That's not what I wanted to be doing.
Yeah.
I lived in a little place where you couldn't find a job. Like, there's not really jobs in East Glacier Park, Montana.
It's
full time.
Right. Anyone who goes through there will realize that it's
not a lot going on.
Right.
Good people, but not a lot going on. Right. So
the scenery is great.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just go a little west and you'll think you went to heaven.
Yeah. No, there's a lot of neat things about it. But and this is an important point too. If people that want to look at a career in the outdoors and in media, you know, I've been all over in it as a guide and a fisherman and TV shows and this and that. And I look at it, and then this transition that I made really, I self-funded my transition into being a photographer. And I think people have this illusion that all you need to do is go out and, you know, get access and take some pictures and send your shit in or stuff, excuse me. And all of a sudden, like, you know,
I'm the checks in the mail.
I'm paying for my gear.
Yeah, mailbox money. Yeah.
That's all I want to do is pay for my gear, you know.
Yeah.
First of all, you can't have that mindset. But I'll back up and say, I think I probably invested, I don't know, $100,000 or more, 5 years of going hardcore, as much 40 to 50,000 miles a year on my pickup before I ever showed anybody a photo.
Really?
Well, because it was obvious by that time that if you're going to be in this business and somebody says, "Hey, Randy, that's a really great photograph you sent me, and I think we can put it on our cover, but before we do, send me 50 more." And most guys don't have 50 more.
Right.
But when the door opens and the editors and the photo buyers are saying, you know, they're running a business.
Right.
When they look at you, you can't just have one photo.
Right.
So I figured if the door was going to open up, I was going to kick the damn thing down, and we're going to be partners. And that's exactly the way it worked.
Yeah.
So that's, I mean, I don't know how it would work today, but it is kind of what worked for me.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing that worked for me and still does in some ways is I shoot what I shoot. That's it.
So if someone doesn't say, "Tony, go shoot this for me," you say, "This is my vision. This is my the way I want the world to see this landscape or this
right." And if they say, you know, well, I'm working on a project right now for a nonprofit where I'm traveling around photographing sort of endangered landscapes. I mean, they don't necessarily describe what I'm supposed to do. They just say, "We know that you know how to do this, and go do it."
Right. That's why they want you. Yeah. You've got the eye. Right. You've got the image. You know how this landscape
and what
speaks.
The story is.
Right.
You know, it's not just a picture of a place. There is a story in this image, and you have to put those pieces together. And you can't put too many of them in there, but you got to put enough to tell a story. So. So that's one project right now, but really, when it came to wildlife, and I get asked this all the time, and it's another important little tidbit about business and about making a living in this industry is people send me, say, "Hey, can I send you some of my photographs and you can look at them and tell me what you think?" You know, and if I did that, and that's all I did, I'd spend all my time doing it. I mean, literally. But here's all you have to do. It's not a secret. If what you're producing is as good or better than what you see produced in the media, you have a chance. That's all you have is a chance. But if you're real about what you're doing and you're going, "Yeah, I was so excited just to see this freaking elk coming at me that I took a bunch of shots of him," and you're so excited because you just did that, and you look at your pictures and you're like, "Wow, that's cool," and then you look at the covers of a magazine and you're like, "But I don't think they're the same." You got work to do.
Yeah.
That's all there is to it. You just have to, you know, so I put my own vision into what I do, and I figured, you know, I've got to at least be as good as the other guys, and I'm going to be better. And the way I'm going to be better is not because my images are really any better. It's because I work harder than they do.
Yeah.
I go harder, I go longer, I stay longer, I eat less, I sleep less, I drink less. I mean, that's the way it works.
No, and in our platforms, you know, before we turned on the mics this morning, I was talking to you and you were asking me questions about how do you find time, Randy, to do TV, podcast, Hunt Talk, all the digital platforms, and now YouTube. And it's just, I think people see what you've accomplished, or maybe think about what I do, and they think, "Oh man, I want to go do that." But the amount of work it takes to get to where you are or to build big platforms, it's a job. You got to look at it as, I'm going to be serious about this. And as quick as it gets rough going, you don't fold the tent and say, well, I'm going to go back to, in my case, doing tax returns. It just doesn't work that way.
No.
But so one of the things that you talked about right there, you said you have to tell a story.
Mm-hmm.
How hard is it to tell a story? Because I'm thinking, all right, you have an image. You have one creative asset to tell your story. Or each chapter, maybe you could look at it as, okay, this image is chapter 1, the next image is chapter 2. Those who write, they have almost unlimited amount of words to tell the story, or maybe their editor confines them. In the TV and video world that I do, it's a lot easier to tell a story. It seems like being restricted to one creative asset to tell a complicated story has to, it's hard. It's got to be.
You know, it's, I kind of looked at it the other way, though. I mean, really, it's when I started working around video and TV a number of years ago, I was just like so confused. I couldn't see straight with it. Like, I'm like, wait a minute, you're doing, how come you got to do that way? And like the whole filming thing was just, can we stop for a second? I don't even know what we're doing.
Yeah.
You know, I don't. And so for me, it was like, I can't tell a story with motion because I have no idea what you're doing. All I know is people are doing stuff and you're getting it filmed, but I don't know how that turns into anything. Because, you know, but for me, it's like, you know, I can just, and literally, I've described it before like this. When I have a job to do, and the job, for example, is to capture someone in their environment, or maybe it's just the environment, I literally just look at it and I get this like, almost like a heads-up display. Like you would think about in a helicopter or something, like a, you know, you can see it. And it just sort of bobs around in there until it stops. And that's when I take the picture.
Really?
Yeah, it's just like that. It's just, there's no, you know, generally there's not a lot of thought. And,
Really?
and that's the challenge of creating good imagery, is to just create it and not really overproduce it. And once you start down the path of picking elements, you know, I mean, I'm good enough at it now, having done so much. I mean, I've got shot cameras now for a long time, over 1 million images, and I've probably only shot a few good ones, actually. But when you shoot that many, the challenge becomes freedom. You get too involved in it, and the freedom goes away, and you don't produce good stuff anymore. So you got to keep your head sort of open. And you can't wait for it. You just have to create it when it's there. And so you can't overthink it.
See, that's where I couldn't do it. I would way overthink it. That's why I need a point and shoot.
Well, I feel like, you know, one thing that is easy to do, and that I think if people want to become better photographers, all you need to do is just really kind of step back and look at it and understand that when you're telling a story with an image, it's two-dimensional. And so the problem becomes conveying something where you're actually immersed in it. I can smell it, I can feel it, I can taste it, and I can see this view that a camera can't see. And so the challenge is to realize that when people look at that photo, they have none of that going on.
Right.
And that is precisely why when you get home, and most of us get home with our pictures, and we're like, that's not what it looked like when I was there. You know, it's because you didn't really focus on what you were taking a picture of. I mean, it's sort of like you look at that and everybody's like, wow, look at that sunset, you know? And it's like, okay, it's a sunset, but what is going on? Focus on the subject, and you decide what that is. Like, I don't have to tell you. You decide.
Yeah.
And then photograph it. And if people just stopped and did that little piece, they would find that their images turn out a lot better, because instead of just going, wow, this is awesome. And in video, you can do that.
Right.
Because it's like, whoa, I can show you everything, and
right.
you can hear it.
Yep.
You can't do that in a still
Right. There's
photo.
no audio in an
No.
image.
So, I mean, in a nutshell, that's what it is. And I try to create, my most successful work, if you measure success by income, has been the most successful work I've done has been the stuff that I've created for myself and found a home for.
Really?
Not something someone's paid me to do, not something I was focused on going to do. It was finding these things that really changed the way I looked at a different piece of landscape, create an image of it, and then find a home for it. And when I say find a home, that means sell it.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Huh. But do you think that's because it's just now it is you and your personal mind, it's almost like you are creating it out of your passion, and versus someone saying, hey, go create this for me?
Yeah, well, because, for example, if you have to show, there's two ways to do it. You can either sort of be the guy who does what everybody else does and just try to play that game with stock photography. It's just like, I got to have a picture of a bluebird because I'm going to sell one day. So you just build this enormous catalog of work that has every species there is, and you're sort of like, you got it all, right? Or you can specialize in creating things that other people have never seen,
right?
Or looking at it in a way that no one's ever showed you. That doesn't mean it hasn't been done. It just means no one's putting it out there, or you haven't seen it, right?
Yeah.
So that's been my thing. It's like, how can I show somebody something different? They've seen 1,000 million pictures of the national parks. I mean, how are you going to show somebody Glacier National Park different than what they've seen before?
Right.
And to me, that's the challenge. It's like, I got to have a picture of Wild Goose Island because I got to have it because I'll sell it.
Yeah.
But if I'm going to go create something in the Glacier National Park, it ain't going to be something that you've seen before. And that's my approach to most everything I do when it comes to taking pictures. I got to show you something you haven't seen before.
Yeah.
And I get lucky once in a while. I mean, literally, everybody has done so much work. There's such great photographers. People do all kinds of cool stuff. And so it's a super challenge. And one of the ways I convinced myself that you haven't seen it before is I don't look at other people's stuff.
Right. It's interesting. Steve Ranella and I can't remember if we talked about it on his Meat Eater podcast or if it was before we turned on the mics, but we were asking each other, do you watch other outdoor TV? And for the most part, we were like, no, not really. I mean, it might be on in the background as static, but so when you say that you really, you don't look at other images or you really don't focus on what other people are doing, there's kind of a parallel there for our side too.
I kind of feel bad about it on one hand too. I mean, literally I get, every time I go somewhere, last night we were at the Wild Sheep Foundation and with the backcountry hunters and anglers, and it's very common, as you know, for people to ask you. They kind of want to feel like there's a community there, and so they want to talk to you about personal things sometimes, and that's generally trying to make a connection with you about people you might know.
Yeah.
It's not really name dropping. It's just really trying to understand your world, and so people will say, "Do you know this guy? Do you know that guy? Do you know this guy?" And like 9 times out of 10, I don't know these people. And they're like, "Oh, he's only the greatest photographer that ever lived," And I'm like, well, I wish thanks for letting me know and I'll look him up. But honestly, I spend no time looking at what other people do. And I get a little bit frustrated because I feel like people ask me how to become a better photographer or how do I get into the business. And they have obviously spent way too much time looking at other people's stuff and trying to either emulate what they're doing, do something the same. And it's like, you got to learn. So you got to start somewhere.
Yeah.
But at some point you got to break out and you got to be who you are. Otherwise, you're just noise. Mm-hmm. Right. And I'm not putting you down. I'm just saying, like, create something on your own once in a while.
Yeah.
And I think that beautiful, but
to all messaging. When we started On Your Own Adventures as the TV show, I got laughed out of the SHOT Show. They're like, self-guided public land hunting? What? Good luck with that, son. And so we had to just go out and make some of our own mistakes. But in that process, there's this discovery of, hey, this worked. This is what my message is going to be about, the experience of the hunt. Yeah, so what? We shot a little forky buck, but everyone loved the episode. What was it about that episode that everybody liked? Well, they liked the story. They liked the fact that it had, some generational story to it. It had this or it had that. So to your point of going out and doing your own thing, I think that would apply to anyone who wants to do their own messaging, whether it's photography, video, writing. You really got to tell your story. If you're trying to tell someone else's story, it's kind of like when we're sitting around the campfire and Bob tells the story about Jack's hunt. It's way better if Bob tells the story about Bob's hunt, or
right.
Jack tells his own story about his own hunt.
Yeah.
It's way more powerful. But so I see your images, Tony, and we could list off, I don't know how many magazines that you end up on the cover of. In our hunting world, Field and Stream, Outdoor Life, those guys they have you on retainer, or you're
wish.
Regularly there.
I wish.
I see one of the images. There's a couple images that you've done that when I saw them first, I knew they were yours just by the story they told, but they still stick with me. You did a grizzly bear one. I think it was on the cover of one of my Fair Chase magazines for Boone and Crockett. Mm-hmm. And when I saw that, it's like, that's everything about a wild place that I want to make sure there's wild places like that. And then the other one was you and some guys sitting around a fire, and I think you guys had just come off a mountain on a sheep hunt or something, if I'm remembering that right. And I looked at that, and it's almost like I could smell the smoke. I could almost taste the back straps on that sheep being cooked over that fire. I could almost hear the story of everybody. You know how it is when it's you're like, we did it. We didn't think we were going to be able to pull it off, but we did. And you're sitting around the fire, and it's just like this euphoria feeling.
Well, and it's funny you bring that photo up because we didn't know we had done it yet. I mean, really? That's what's cool about the photo and the experience is that we actually had, I think it was 9 days in on a stone sheep hunt in northern British Columbia. We'd actually, 2 rams were killed that evening, and it was getting dark. And so while, we had done it, what we had done is trapped ourselves in the bush with 2 dead sheep, with grizzly bears running around and no way to get home. I mean, literally, that's what happened. Yeah. So we sent one guy, he's a Kiwi, New Zealand guy from New Zealand, freaking tougher than a box of rocks. He's about 25 years old, 6'3". He can carry anything, anywhere, as long as he needs to go. Yeah. We were a number of miles away from the horses, and we had left one of our guides. He's a Tahltan Indian guide. He's probably, I think he was 75 years old. He just loves the horses, and he wanted to be back on this hunt in particular, so he came with us. Anyhow, he's back a number of miles and coulees and up and down and over, and none of us had been through this country before. Yeah. We had to get word back to him that we were all right because it was dark. We'd been on all day. Yeah. So Henry goes, we sent him back. Like, do you remember how to get back there? And Henry's like, yeah, sure, and he's got that accent. And he's like, kind of like, what do you want me to do, boss? So he loads up his gear. Off he goes. And his job was to get back to the horses and tell the guy, we got to go back to camp. Them guys they're doing what they're doing, which is sleeping in the bush. Mm-hmm. Starts to rain. We're going down this coulee, and I asked the guide, I'm like, do you know where we're going? He's like, well, I've been here a long time, and I know this mountain, but never really been here. So we're like, okay. He said, there's an old camp down on this trail, and now we got to get down to this old camp and camp. And how far is it? He's like, well, a few miles, and no trails. Like, this is bush. You know what it's like, sheep hunting, right? Whacking. Yeah. It's this upside down brush, they call it, know. So we get bushwhacking down there. We got these sheep, and all of a sudden, there's a freaking cave. And we're like, it's just cut into the limestone, and it's like, wow, there's enough room for 1, 2, 3, 4 guys. Perfect. Wow. So we start hacking branches and building a little bed, and he builds a fire, and I'm looking at this and I'm going, and this is what separates a professional from a guy just taking pictures. Yeah. is that you have to be prepared at this point when it's raining and dark and the shits and you want to lay down and you want to just quit.
Yeah.
The other guys are going to lay down and quit because they're the hunting guys. They're just like, we got to, yeah. So you got to get up and say, no, I'm going to take these photos. And at the time I thought, I'm pushing the limits of my equipment, like by far. It's dark. I got a little fire. So I grabbed everybody's headlamp. I tried to figure out how am I going to get as much light on this as I can do it. We threw a couple of headlamps upside down in the scene there and the fire's going and I took the photos. And the other thing was I didn't have a tripod. That's a handheld photo at like a fifth of a second or something. I mean, I just started cranking them off because I figured if I get 50, one is going to be in focus.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what happened. And so anyway, that's the story on that photo. And the grizzly bear photo, again, that's a really fantastic image. And Fairchase did publish that image 10 years ago, I think, or whatever it was, 8 years ago. I mean, I don't like to put myself in really precarious positions photographing wildlife, particularly grizzly bears. I don't really go chase them around. I did a presentation on that recently in Great Falls, and I'm telling people, like, I'm an opportunist, If something's going to drop dead in front of me and get eaten by a grizzly bear, I'm probably going to take a picture of it.
Yeah.
But I'm not out there looking for it.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, it's these kind of things that you've done, and hearing your story, there's parallels to other people I know who are serious public land advocates, and that's where we're going to. I think last night you really gave a good message when you said, you know what, we are an army, we are a team, we are a group of public land advocates. And even if you don't have big platforms, every one of us can do something for public lands by telling our own story and what those public lands mean to us. And I was watching, I don't know if you were watching the audience as you said that. I was. And every one of them, it was like, yeah, I got a public land story. And it doesn't have to be a novel. I think they realized when you said it that this whole creating and explaining to the world the value these public lands have for us, so that, I mean, you and I get to do it as our daily lives. And I think we've went down that path because of our passion and connection, our lifetime of being on these public lands. And now we've reached that point of we have a responsibility. We're not going to let this go away.
Right.
And I think that audience you spoke to last night, probably the audience listening here, in today's world of so much static, so much media, it's like, well, how am I going to make a difference? I would bet right now, this morning, there are a dozen or more people who listened to you last night who are trying to think of what is my public land story? How do I tell my public land story? And I thought that was a really powerful message, that it's just one person at a time telling their story, connecting their story so that others understand it.
Yeah. And I think the reason to do that is, one, it's sort of refreshing for yourself to kind of reminisce a little bit. But the other thing is, I'm just getting a little bit tired of the assault on public lands. I mean, it's getting a little bit ridiculous at times.
I'm beyond tired.
Yeah, it's like, okay, guys, we got to do this again. And so I'm trying to figure out, what is it going to take to send a real message at some point? And so if you look back at successful projects or where people have really made a difference and changed things, it's through their personal stories. And so I'm thinking, so do I want to be back here in 10 years talking about the same damn thing because I got the same clowns doing the same thing, Right.
Clowns being politicians.
The politicians trying to take public lands. And I'm thinking, we need to build a system to head that off so that the clowns, the politicians, some of them are good people too. Don't get me wrong. I'm not a government hater, but some of these guys get a little carried away with power. And so I thought, well, what would it be like if in 10 years they sort of went out their mouth comes, what about these federal lands? Should we try to sell them? And then all of a sudden their staff person like socks him in the neck and be like, what? And he's like, did I say something wrong? Yeah. Like, do you want to lose this election? Because that's the quickest way to do it.
Right.
And that's so because the message is already out there. The people have already spoken. They tell their stories. It's available. And half the world knows those people over in America are pretty serious about that land base that they have. And it's like, so that's kind of what I'm thinking. And the other part of it is the legacy. You know, the legacy that we've been given because of a lot of people who are very thoughtful, who have spent a lot of time and energy working hard to build this public land legacy that we have given us an opportunity that most of us take advantage of. You know, we don't do it on purpose. We just don't realize what's going on. Like being a kid again.
Right.
And so I feel like the question I have now for this group and other people who use public lands is, it's not cliche. What will our legacy be?
Right.
Randy and Tony and everybody that goes out and uses the public lands. What is the story? What story will be told? What legacy will we leave in 20 or 30 or 40 years? I mean, are we going to look at this and somebody's going to look back in 30 years and go, what the hell were those clowns doing back in 2016 watching this whole thing go down the drain?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and we didn't put up a fight.
Yeah.
We just sort of let it go. Oh yeah, that's good.
Yeah, that
you know, that is the story I don't want to see told.
Yeah, that to me that is like the end of a horror story. It's like under no scenario am I willing to see that be the end of the book, the last chapter in the book. And I was asked by Boone and Crockett Club in July to go and do a keynote address in Springfield, Missouri they invited these young hunters and their parents there. And that night I had to give the address, and I'll be honest, I get to do this a lot. I do a lot of public speaking. I was probably more nervous that night than I have been in any address I've ever given. And I've given addresses to much larger crowds of, you know, well-known and supposedly important people. But talking to that group, because this legacy thing, I feel like I've borrowed this landscape and now I'm going to give it to someone else to say, look, I've borrowed it, I've used it, I hope it's in better shape. And I wanted to give something upbeat and positive. And as I was preparing for that, I spent a couple weeks working on my presentation, and it got back to, you know what, really what I have to do is just tell them my public land story. And my public land story, a lot of people have heard it, but you know, growing up in northern Minnesota, and when my parents got divorced when I was 11, if hunting would have cost $1 a day, I would not have been a hunter. The reality was, as the oldest of 3 kids, when my dad had moved out to the oil patch after they got divorced, and he was trying to find his way and get back on his feet, my mom was raising us 3 kids as a waitress at a country diner. She just would not have had $1 to give me to go hunting that day. And fortunately for me, there was public land right out my back door. And that's what I did.
Right.
I hunted and I fished and I trapped and I did all these things. And like you were just saying, I kind of took it for granted. Mm-hmm. I thought every kid grew up in America where you head out the back door with your 410 or your 22 or your 30-30 or your fishing rod. And that's what you did all day. And so then I for this presentation, I wanted the parents and the kids to understand how much this public land experience allowed me to become a hunter, and how being a hunter has formed who I am as an adult, not just as an identity, but in the last 10 years, I've tried to think about where are the things in my hunting life that now become applicable to my business life or my personal life or whatever. And my wife always remarks that, Randy, you are the most determined, bullheaded guy I know. I've never met anybody who will not accept no for an answer like you, or, you know, there's no challenge, no hurdle. And so I got to thinking about it. Well, since I started hunting, I knew that 9 out of 10 times I was going to fail. So when I come to business and I start on a project and I say, well, it's going to take 10 times before I find the right formula, it doesn't even faze me that it might take 10 efforts.
Right.
Why? Because that's how I'm trained as a hunter.
If you're going to bake a cake from scratch, you're going to have to bake 5 or 10 of them every single time to get a good recipe, right?
Right. And so I'm telling these kids and their parents that, you know what? You might think it's just hunting today. You might not realize the value these lands play in you being a hunter today. But as you get older, you will someday look in the mirror and say, oh, that's how I figured that out. That's why I'm good at developing a day-by-day strategy to accomplish a long-term, year-long project. Well, quick as hunting season's over, guess what? We're already planning how next year's hunt is going to happen. Mm-hmm. Well, in business or in whatever endeavor it is in life, a very successful trait, or a very common trait to successful people is they can plan, they can then execute and have success because of that.
Yeah.
And so I got to thinking about every place I'm at in my life today, I can almost trace back to the fact that I had public lands where I could go and hunt.
Right. And let's not forget, and you mentioned it, a mother who supported it at some level, whether directly or indirectly, whether she knew what you were doing or not, right? She wasn't spanking you when you got home for doing it. So I feel the same way. I mean, a shout out to mothers, really, because I know we say that a lot, and hi, mom on TV or whatever, but the fact is, there were times when my mother would actually take me and drop me off in a wild place to go fishing and write the note to get me out of school.
Yeah.
Because she knew how important it was. Like if I'm going to keep this guy sane, he's going to have to go fishing. And she would do that. And thinking back on it, having kids now, imagining, your 13, 12-year-old kid, and you're going to throw him in the bush and drive away. I mean, that's a big deal. Right. For a mother, that's a big deal.
Yeah.
You could fall in that river and die.
Right.
And I guarantee you, as they're driving away, they're thinking,
right, this
is not smart, but I got to make it happen. This kid's got to do this because that's what he is. And so, that's cool.
Right.
And there was access. Imagine there are people who, first of all, don't have that kind of access.
Yep.
And secondarily, actually, don't even experience being alone or being outside doing things because there is no access. I can't imagine a life like that.
Right.
And I look around and to this day, I'll tell you, I'm a hunter. We hadn't talked much about that, but I am a hunter and a fisherman. And I have never killed an animal on private land to this day. That's not bragging rights.
Right.
That is... The way I feel about hunting is when I go hunting personally for myself, I do not want to be guided by my concern over whether or not Lunch Bucket Joe, Rancher Ted has given me the right directions on which fence I can and cannot cross.
Yeah.
And that is just the way I feel. I want to, you know what? I may not see as many deer as you. I may not have the opportunities you have. But when I go up in the mountain, I know that I can, if I want to, walk for 10 miles in that direction,
right,
up the hill, down the hill, through the bush, over the river, and there ain't anybody going to tell me no.
Right.
I do not like crossing fences when I'm hunting because generally that's a land, sort of a marker between two property boundaries. And I get a little nervous about that.
Yeah. And, it's interesting you say that, Tony. And as you were saying that, it made me quickly realize how blessed we are in America, here in Montana, especially, and a few other places, that you can walk somewhere 10 miles in one direction and not hit a fence.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people listening to this podcast, that's just not, if that was how they had to, or if they felt, well, I only want to hunt if I can go 10 miles and not hit a fence. A lot of them wouldn't be able, there's no place geographically, physically,
right,
where they can do that. Or there's no place where they can go and hunt without having a relationship with somebody. And those people come to me when I'm on the road, probably like they do to you, and say, Randy, you have no idea how lucky you are. I'd worked with this farmer for the last 20 years. He's been a family, shirt tail cousin, and he sold to the subdeveloper, and I lost my hunting spot.
Yeah.
And you look in their eyes, and it's like just a part of their life has disappeared. And it might have only been a 200-acre piece.
Mm-hmm.
And I take that message from them and say, you know what? That's why these public lands, they are so valuable, and they're going to be more valuable 10 years from now. And even, but it's not going to be a linear increase in value. It's going to be exponential. And so when I hear these guys tell me that, I feel terrible for them, because here I'm in this almost embarrassment of riches where I live as far as public lands, and where you live, and where those of us in the West live, to the point where I think if you have an overabundance, we could have a tendency to take it for granted. Fortunately, people like you and a lot of us don't.
Right.
But I know a lot of hunters are just like, well, that's kind of how it's always been. And you're like, whoa, no, wake up.
Right.
Go back to Iowa and talk to the guy who I just talked to, who lost his hunting place because the city's growing now, and it's going to be a subdivision.
Or they get outbid.
Or whatever. Yeah,
somebody comes in with a big pile of money, and you're just like, really?
Right. And I look at that person, and I listen to them, and I know they are the type of conservation-minded person who we got to keep them in the hunting world. We can't let this person and their culture, how they identify as a hunter, we got to find a way to not let that person fall by the wayside. Obviously, we don't have unlimited resources where I can go say, well, let me go buy a couple thousand acres in Iowa so you guys have a place to hunt. I can't do that. But I can take that lesson and apply it to other places where and people might, in a political season like we are this year, I think people are almost tone deaf to the whole political rambling and just the craziness but tuning it out can come at some expense. I get it too. I'm like so over it. I've been over it since it started 8 months ago. I just want to blow up my TV, but I hope all who are listening know that there are public land stories of every person who hunts on public land. And the study says that 70% of people in the West hunt primarily on public land. They're like you. They want like me, they want the 10 miles, head into the mountain, no fence. Oh, well, if I don't see as many deer, then who cares?
Yeah, right.
I've had my experience. I've not, but I just worry that in a political year like this, we become so numb to politics that as these politicians want to try change public land ownership in the West, people are just tuned out to it, or they don't realize their story, like you told them last night. Your story is important. Go share it with, even if you only share it with 5 people, or if you only share it with one person, but that person happens to be a policymaker or happens to be someone running for office, you're making a difference.
Yeah.
You're making a big difference, because that person they've looked you in the eye, and that politician is like, man, if I screw this guy or gal out of their hunting spot, I could tell their passion, there's going to be hell to pay. How do I deal with this?
Right. They listen. They will listen. I mean, you don't get everything we ask for, but I'll tell you what, back to Washington, D.C., working there were times when it was really hard. We'd build a project, or we want to put some money into a pilot project to look at some aspect of the environment, and we would have a hard time finding a story. It's like, well, we got to find a story here. We can't just dream something up. We really need to find people who have a story and who have some success in doing kind of what we're thinking we can do. And you'd think at that level, you could, you have the whole world at your fingertips, right? It's a big place. You got access to power and money, and it's crazy. But no, it's not. It's like, well, why are we having a hard time finding this story? It's because people aren't telling it. And that's back to the public land part and telling your story is, and I should be able to go on Google and type in, your public land story and have like 1,000 hits and I could read it. They don't have to be long stories, but people can do that and should. And if you tell, if you're a representative or maybe your local chapter or whatever, I mean, people know that, it's not just knowing that out your back door is the national forest, because it's sort of like if a tree falls in the woods, and there's nobody there to hear it, does it make a noise?
Yeah.
Well, if you go out and we aren't at least somewhat telling a story about using the place, it's almost like use it or lose it.
It is.
Because that's the way they can look at it. It's like, oh, yeah, nobody goes up there,
Right.
it's just a bush.
Wasteland, yeah.
It's a big wasteland, yeah.
Dead timber, out with it.
Yeah. So, and so we are kind of doing ourselves a little bit of injustice. I don't want to get too carried away and saying, like, you have to tell everybody everything you do. But I am saying it's sort of like, yeah, well, we're going to have ourselves to blame if, your representative thinks nobody goes there, so we may as well just trade it out. Mm-hmm. And yet they come to find out after it happens, like 100 people write them letters and go, you so-and-so, like, that's where I used to go hang out. What are you doing?
Right.
It's kind of late now.
Yeah.
So be prepared to tell a story. And in doing that, if we're talking about hunting too, I mean, there's two pieces of this. I mean, on one hand, you're talking about public lands, and we're talking about losing that legacy. And there's a chance of that even. And the other part is, what's the image of hunting?
Mm-hmm.
And the stories that need to be told are deeper than you sitting there. However you want to have an image of the animal that you may have killed or the fish that you've taken. That's not the whole story. And I want to see people, embellish a little more in media, whether it's written, whether it's photographs or video, a little more about what's going on versus, especially with photos. Mm-hmm. Like, I asked the question, and I would ask this audience, why do you hunt? And everybody's going to have their own reasons, and some are going to...
You did that last night. You went around and asked a lot of people, why do you hunt? Why do you hunt?
And they all gave their own answers, and it was kind of a setup. I knew what was going to happen, or at least I hoped it would happen. And nobody said to put a picture of me with my big buck on Instagram.
Right. That wasn't anyone's motivation about why they hunt.
But yet, here's the trouble. That's all we know.
Right.
So you don't come out and say that's what you're going to do. And maybe it was the audience, but I could probably ask everybody, and nobody, even if their mission was to show everybody a big buck, nobody there would say, well, I need that picture of me with the big buck, and I'm going to put it on Facebook. And yet that is the only story they end up telling.
Right.
So it's like this total disconnect.
And that's what, using Facebook as an example, or Instagram or whatever, there's all these other people who aren't hunters,
right?
Who see that image, and they don't see that image as we see it. This guy, if his goal was, I wanted to shoot a big buck to post on Facebook, it does represent a whole lot more to him than just a set of antlers. But to the person who doesn't hunt, they see that, and all it does represent is this guy wanted to go and kill this animal to put it on Facebook.
And we know that's not the case. Like, there's
Correct.
a lot more to the story.
Right. But we're heading down that path so fast, Tony, and it's really impacted in the last few years, especially for me. And I feel like I kind of started out as a different duck when I started this. The last 3 or 4 years, I've really tried to tell stories that are, I guess you'd call them counterculture, the subculture of, I want it to be a story. And we've always done that, but I've focused on it more and more and more. And now, as much as there's the pressure to, in the world of media that, people want to see, the end result, I'm trying to figure out, how do I tell a story with an image? Because these images you're talking about, these single piece images of a Facebook post or an Instagram post, are becoming a very big part of how we communicate what hunting is. Mm-hmm. So I'm trying to think, how do I tell a deeper story with that single image, which is why your work I'm so interested in, of how do you do that? I
guess I can't answer that question entirely, but what I can say is, why does it matter to anybody? I mean, why does it matter that the world knows you shot a big deer,
Right.
or any deer for that matter.
Right.
Now, we're back to storytelling. It might sound like I'm on one hand I'm saying tell your story, and then I'm like, why does it matter? Don't tell a story. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm wondering about is why. I'm not saying it's necessarily wrong, but I don't know why that is the story. I don't know why the dead animal in the picture is the story.
Right.
What is it that is it this? I don't know what it is, honestly.
Yeah.
I mean, and I've gone through this, and I travel all over the world taking photographs of hunters in Africa, South America, New Zealand, Mexico, Europe, and I still have to shoot the grip and grin stuff because that's their memory.
Mm-hmm.
And that's their piece of remembering that experience at that time. And most of that doesn't end up on the internet.
Right.
And I told myself when I started down this path in my business I was a hunter in the first place before I got into photography, that there is no reason for me to build my success personally. This is personal. So I'm not telling you how to live. I'm telling you what my deal is. There's no reason for me to build my success on the back of killing something and showing somebody what I did.
Right.
That's not where I'm going with this. That is a private situation for me. I'm super selfish. And when I go hunting, if I kill a doe, if I kill a buck, there are not photos to be put on the internet of that experience or of that dead animal. And I'm not saying you just have to be a little more careful, I think, about it. And so for me, I'm not motivated by trying to show somebody that I'm good enough to kill this big animal, because at the end of the day, we are so friggin' sophisticated right now. It really doesn't make a lot of difference.
Yeah.
I mean, it's sort of like, well, we've got more access to certain areas now. We've got more money. We've got more sophisticated products, longer shooting guns, bigger scopes, we have got more junk to be successful. It's almost like, if you're not killing something big, it's because you're not trying.
Yeah.
Because we've got every damn thing there is in the world to try and go after these animals or whatever. So I may sound like I'm running this down, and maybe people don't like it, but the point is, there's an experience there, and to me, that authentic sort of experience is really what's important about it. That's the story. Be careful about putting the real heavy, hardcore grip and grin stuff on without some explanation or backstory, and just be careful with it.
Yeah.
We have to do that. I mean, the path is like, look, if you're going to walk across a meadow in Glacier National Park, if you spread guys out and you put 20 of them out there and you walk across the meadow and everybody's doing their own thing, you don't notice it.
Right.
But if everybody walks in the parallel straight line through the middle of that meadow, there's going to be a trench in that meadow for 100 years.
Right.
And that's what we're doing here at the Hunting World. We have put the trench in across this meadow, and now we're trying to figure out,
how do we get out of it?
How do we sort of smooth this back out so that we can still have this cool meadow and we can still go walk across it?
Yeah.
And that's the way we need to be back to. And I don't know the answer, but I do know it's stories. It's putting wildlife first. It's putting that as a major primary component, a health protection habitat, and being careful about the media that we choose to deliver.
Yeah. And it's interesting that we're on this discussion, because most people know we've really put a lot of emphasis on our YouTube channel in the last, since January. And it's an unfortunate reality, at least in my experiments I've been doing, is whether or not someone watches a video is most often tied to what little thumbnail you have of that video. And I will put a video out there and it'll be me walking through the snow. And it'll do okay. Every video always has its first little blip because the subscribers to the channel get it and they watch it. But then if I take the same video and I go and I put a picture of us with the end result of the animal, it now steps up to another plane of viewers. It gets way more views. And that's a reality that I have to balance that. And I think it's people that at least in this context I'm talking about, the thumbnail clip I use is kind of the billboard that says, here's what's in this story. And I think part of it is I'm not a good enough storyteller with a single image of a thumbnail to tell them what the story's about. And I do worry, okay, here's Randy sitting there and there's a bull elk laying on the ground next to him. It's like, oh gosh. Every time I post that thumbnail or go through this process, there's a part of me that's like, Randy, you need to get better at telling the story with this single image, because you're kind of playing into the hand here of, okay, is it the journey or the destination? I show them the thumbnail that's the destination in hopes that they will watch the videos that takes them on the journey. I don't know how to do that. And I think a lot of us in the hunting world, we had a podcast about a year ago, and one of the guests said, I don't know that the hunting world was ready for Facebook or Instagram maybe you could say that about a lot of activities. I don't know. Maybe it's not just hunting, but we're all ambassadors to the activity of hunting.
Right.
We're either going to tell a good, powerful, meaningful story that helps, and some are going to be stories or images that have the opposite effect. And I guess our goal is, how do we help the collective community through our leadership of what we produce as media, or how we help others, or we learn from others to do that.
We're in the space, so that's just in the first place, you're living in and operating in and making a career out of this hunting space, and that's sort of right out of the gate is kind of like, wow, like, should we even be doing this kind of thing? Like, is there even room for this in what we're doing today? And I think, and for me, I'm saying, yeah, I mean, obviously I think there is, but now the question is, how are we going to do this right? And I don't think the story's told yet exactly. On the other hand, I think a little temperance is probably good. And when it comes to go to the news. You ask people in the print media business, magazine business. If you went and talked to Anthony Licata or Andrew McKean at Outdoor Life in Bonnie Air, if you ask those guys what sells magazines,
right,
and even saying magazines is kind of sounding antiquated right now to me, but it's still part of my business. I look at that and I wonder, like, well, what does it sell? Yeah, and the cover sells it. I mean, it's the same example you're using. Like, that's the cover of the magazine or the cover of the video. Right. And like it or not, if it's a beautiful cover, people buy the magazine.
Yeah.
If you put something really corny on there, they don't even pick it up.
Right.
They walk right by to the one that's sitting right next to it that's got a picture of a guy with a 270-inch mule deer buck, and they're like, oh my God. It could be the trashiest piece of magazine there ever was, but that picture just sold the magazine.
Right.
And we buy that stuff. So, I mean, like, I don't know what to say.
I don't have the answer
I don't have the answer either.
I think there probably is no quote-unquote answer. I think we all want a checklist we go to. Yeah, I checked off all three things. That's good. That's right. That's proper. I don't know that there is that. I think it's just a consciousness or an awareness of, what are we doing? How is this going to be perceived, not just among us, but among those who are looking at us? Because whether we want to admit it or not, motives matter to the rest of society.
No doubt.
The why is way more important than the who and the how.
Absolutely.
To them. And if we collectively are putting out there something that causes them to say, I don't get the why of hunting, we got a problem. Well, we're going to have a problem.
I have got this theory on that, and
let's hear it.
It's hard to understand, and it's hard to get your head around this. For most of my life, since I can remember, I was old enough to sort of start making decisions as a little kid, had always been interested in why, thinking about what's going on. And as I grew up and started getting in trouble, I was introduced to...
Growing up is overrated.
Yeah. I was introduced to therapy, literally. Going and talking to somebody like, okay, let's figure out why you're acting like an idiot, right? And in my experience through life with this, it's like an adjustment, like it's exercise for your brain. Everybody should have a little exercise for the brain. And I learned this thought about, like, stay out of my head. right? Stay out of my head, because what happens is we end up with, and this is the story part, is too many people want to tell your story without knowing it. So,
True.
So it's almost like, to take a phrase from Hillary Clinton, why does it matter? Or at this point, what difference does it make, right?
Yeah.
The point is, if it's dead, it's dead. Why does it matter to people so much? And most of the non-hunting community is in the camp of, he's a freaking bloodthirsty killer, that guy. And you're like, wait a minute, you don't even know that. And yet they're inside that guy's head. And once they figure out, for example, that, well, he got hit by a car, or whatever. I mean, I'm just saying, there's a story. And people's attitudes towards hunting change when they actually understand a story. And so by staying out of my head, what I mean by that is, don't automatically assume that because I'm, quote, a trophy hunter, that I'm one thing or another,
right.
Because every single animal, more or less, is a trophy. There is no question about it to me. For me, that is the case. And so I look at that and I go, well, just because I want to hunt an extra month because I'm looking for whatever deer trips my trigger, doesn't mean I'm a bad hunter or I shouldn't be doing this. But what happens is people get inside your head, and I look at that and I go, what difference does it make if I shot this deer because he had a big antler or because he had no antlers? I just killed him. He's dead.
He doesn't care.
And on one hand, you might think it's okay if I said, well, I killed him because I was hungry, or I killed him. It's all managed. We set numbers, we set goals, we were good stewards of the land. And so I have a real hard time with people who jump to conclusions about looking at somebody that has killed something and automatically making up a story about him. And if they had a different story, they'd automatically change the way they think about it. Yeah. And it's like, so why does it make a difference?
Yeah.
Dead is dead. It's okay to kill a cow standing in a pasture or standing in a line to go to the slaughter. It's okay to eat a chicken that's been dead because it was jammed in a box for 6 months while it grew up big enough to eat. I mean, those things are completely okay. Right. And yet some deer wandering around in the bush that's organic, that tastes good, and I happen to go kill it, it's all of a sudden that's wrong?
Yeah.
Like, that is what I mean. Stay out of my head. You don't know why I'm doing this. And I'm not going to get inside your head because you want to eat freaking lettuce all the time. That's okay.
Right.
I'm not going to be an advocate for lettuce, dude. Have fun.
Yeah.
You got to eat.
and I've talked to and sat in on a lot of discussions with people where that same topic comes up. Why? Why does it matter? Who really cares? And so some people there are people who put a lot of thought to why people care. And Shane Mahoney's been on a couple podcasts, and have a call with Shane. He'll be on this afternoon, not on a podcast, on a different thing, but he has some really good insight about the more we get distance from the natural world, the more we worry about the natural world, and to some in some abstract degree. That people who are disconnected and don't really understand it make really big judgments about it, and they make really big judgments about how we who are still trying to interact with that natural world, what they have strong feelings about what's right or wrong and how we interact. And the point being is that there's still this strong attachment humans have to animals. And that's why people are quick to judge and try to get in our head. And that's just a reality. As our society becomes more and more disconnected, they're going to be more and more judgmental, i.e. getting in our head, those of us who want to stay over there in that natural world.
I mean, why does it matter why, first of all, I killed this deer, when the same question doesn't get asked if you're in the grocery store? How did that plastic wrapped breast make it into that packaging?
Right. Because
the heathens that killed the damn chicken should be put in jail.
Right. Right. Because they are removed from the process that got it to that cellophane wrap.
They're removed from me killing a deer too, though.
Right. But they're seeing you, or they're seeing the image, the end result, and they can make a judgment on that.
Yeah, I guess if you put it, let's go back to the imagery. If on the package of chicken at Albertsons
Had a
had a
chicken
picture-
with its head in the funnel, someone standing there with a big knife, pulling the head out the bottom of the funnel. If you've ever butchered chickens, you
Right.
know what I'm talking about. You stuff them in the funnel upside down. You grab their head, you pull it down outside the funnel, and you got a sharp knife, and you
Right.
cut their head off.
Right, that's
if
the image.
If that was the image,
Nobody would buy chicken.
No one would buy chicken, or people would be all mad about chicken farming.
Right.
Or, I mean, that's just, you know, if on the label of every piece of, you know, T-bone steaks, there was a cow hung up on a gamble by its hind hocks with its guts partway pulled out, and a guy standing there in a sterilized suit with a big knife, if that was the label, people would say, I reject that. If
and
that's
who
what
is
was
that guy doing that?
Right, exactly.
Would they or would they not?
Yeah.
I mean,
So I don't know.
Yeah.
It causes me to wonder. Maybe that's there's always these points of degree, these points on a spectrum where, you know, no matter which measurements you want to have as the left side of the spectrum and the right side of the spectrum, we as a society are going to fall somewhere across that spectrum with far, you know, people on the edge of both. And I think our vision or our perception of how we interact with other living creatures, some view it as very utilitarian, some view it as very spiritual, some view it as,
well, people are making conscious choices to care about things that they want to care about.
Right.
I mean, that's all there is to it, right? At some level, because, you know, let's face it, 100 years ago, my guess is you probably out here in the West, where there's people here long before that, there probably wasn't a lot of argument about killing stuff.
None.
There probably was not a lot of discussion about killing a deer when you saw one.
Right.
There was no, like, should we, shouldn't we? Well, it was, we better figure out how to get this done or we're going to starve to death. And so there's like
Right.
no issue, right? So you're right about the connection. Like we're so far from that in some ways. And then once you get to the point where you're disconnected, then all of a sudden you create your own vision of reality and try to build something that is your utopia, never mind the fact that you're leaving out a bunch of other folks, right?
Exactly.
I'm not going to pick on you for your deal. You don't need to pick on me for mine, because at the end of the day, the closer you are to, in my view, like if you don't have to be a killer, but you just have to respect the fact that if you're going to eat meat, something's going to die.
Right.
Can we get there?
That
Okay?
is, I would say if you want to see some really crazy perspectives, or maybe not crazy, but just the wide spectrum of perspectives, have a big YouTube channel that involves the killing of an animal, which I do. And the comments there that I get are, it doesn't look like you're starving to death. Why did you have to kill that thing? And so usually I try to be diplomatic about it. And I say, you're right, I'm not starving to death. But what difference would it make if I killed this antelope or I went and killed 20 chickens
Right.
for the equivalent of what meat I got off that antelope?
Right.
And usually you don't get a response. Usually it's like, well, but every once in a while, like the thing I've found is bear hunts really get a lot of negative publicity from folks who, for whatever reason, they go out to my YouTube channel and any bear hunt they want to criticize. And so we'll get to that step of, well, what's the difference if I went and killed 5 40-pound halibut or shot this black bear? Or what's the difference if I had 3 little piglets killed instead of this black bear? Then they start making these judgments of, well, that's a wild creature that you should let it live its normal, natural life. Okay, I get that. If that's how you overlay your value system to it, we all have our own value system. I get it. But if there's some moral superiority that comes in having the food supply system kill 3 pigs versus me kill 1 bear, and in killing the bear, I've bought licenses, I've paid excise taxes, I've done all the things of conservation and I'm an advocate for those wild places that the bears are there. where is this moral superiority coming from?
There's a disconnect somewhere, right?
Exactly. And that's what all the big brain people I talk to about why is there this perceived difference? It's just about always, there's no longer a connection. The person feels a spiritual connection to the bear, but they feel a very pragmatic, daily utilitarian connection of, well, this is, inside I know I'm responsible for the death of a lot of pigs and chickens. So I'm okay with that because that's what I do.
Right.
But I've never been responsible for the death of a bear. So I'm not okay with that.
Yeah.
And most people will say it's this disconnect, which I think is why hunters...
Maybe part of the disconnect is that you mentioned something that I think is interesting. There are people who believe that bears could and should live their natural life vis-a-vis not being killed.
Right.
I would argue that that's never been a natural life for any living organism, let alone a bear.
No.
The point is this. They have been hunted in North America for at least 14,000 years,
right,
by humans,
right,
maybe longer. They're hunted by a lot of other things as
right.
well.
Black bears are hunted by grizzly bears.
The whole thing is just a big cycle, and so it's sort of like I try, and that's where people get lost. And I try to remind people that humans are a natural part of this friggin' place, and if you don't believe that, then we've got a problem in discussing what's really happening on Earth.
Right.
Because we are natural, we are here, we are sophisticated enough now to make decisions that some creatures can't because we have a bigger brain, whatever, all that. And so we should sort of be held to a different level. But on the other hand, I don't like the disconnect between humans and the land. I don't like it when people say, well, leave that place alone. You should never go there, or don't go there.
Right.
It's like people been going there forever.
Since time began. Yeah.
So there is no just let it be natural and wild. There is a relationship between humans and places, and with a few exceptions, that have been going on for quite a long time. I doubt there were a lot of people hanging out on the the highest point in Antarctica for very long, right? I mean that's not realistic, but for the most part in North America and other places. It doesn't mean that that's an excuse. The excuse isn't, well, since we've been here a long time, we should just screw it up.
Right.
It means don't disconnect humans from the environment.
Right.
It's the first principle.
Mm-hmm.
Now we can talk about how to make decisions, but...
Right. And when you talk to people who study this stuff, they say, look, part of we as humans we don't want to be involved in painful processes. We don't like the discomfort that comes with killing our own food. With that, especially now. I mean, as we've been able to become urbanized in this continent since even starting in the 1700s, 1800s, it's just accelerated, and it's desired. Our society feels very comforted in being disconnected from that process of death so that we can live. And it results in some strange perceptions of, like you said, humans shouldn't be part of the process. Really?
Right. How are you going to do this?
Whether you believe it or not, you are part of the process.
I know.
When you turn your air conditioner on, that requires electricity that comes from the natural gas that's pulled out of the red desert in Wyoming, and because of your collective demands, now there's less antelope habitat in the red desert of Wyoming. People are disconnected from that, and they're comfortable with that. It's just, I think it's the human nature of, we don't want to be...
Well, you want to see how important wildlife are? I'll tell you right now, and I've seen it, and it's going to happen some more. Wildlife are only like the most important thing until they try to eat you in downtown Calgary.
Yeah.
I'm serious.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like if grizzly bears show up in Calgary, they die.
Yeah.
But yet everybody in Calgary wants everybody who doesn't live in Calgary to live with grizzly bears.
Exactly.
Right? I don't get that. It's like, look, I know how much you care about these animals. You care enough about them to say, not in my backyard will they live. They belong in the mountains where they're actually prairie animals to begin with. They lived all the way to friggin' Texas, and out to the prairie. So it's like, it's back into being in my head, being in someone else's head. Well, why is it okay to kill one for one reason but not for another? It's still dead. Why are you making a judgment about what is going on in my head?
Yeah.
And I can fully accept, and I will right now, that if a grizzly bear comes into downtown Calgary, probably a problem. We should figure this out.
Right.
On the other hand, I'm going, well, we do that every day. They're in my backyard all the time.
Right.
I live with them. Every time I go out my door, I am living with the chance of being eaten by a grizzly bear.
Yeah. In East Glacier,
And
that
I'm
is
not
a
calling the
daily
cops.
risk. Right.
It's like, what am I going to do?
Yeah. Come and kill them all?
Come and
'Cause
kill them
they're
all,
gonna be there
guys.
every day.
Yeah, they're getting too close to town all of a sudden. So again, it's back to this disconnect, I think. And I'm telling you, when the bears go farther than they're supposed to go, and I'm using air quotes here,
Right.
like they're not supposed to be here.
Right.
There's the problem.
End of the bear.
Yeah.
But I guess we'll wrap it up because, or wrap it up with this idea that I think we as messengers, we've just, in what we've talked about here, is this disconnect is not going to get what I would get better. I think we're going to get more disconnected, not less disconnected, or we're going to be less connected, not more connected as a collective society, not just in the United States, but in the world. Because as the population grows the way it is and the habitat for wildlife shrinks, we're going to rely more upon very sterilized manners by which we acquire our food. We're not going to be a society, the people who stay connected living in East Glacier, living around grizzly bears and finding ways to live with grizzly bears is going to be less of a percentage of our society, not more. The person who lives in Chicago or LA or New York or Miami who has no understanding of that, who if a grizzly bear showed up in their backyard, they'd call the authorities and say, come kill this grizzly bear.
Right.
So that's going to be more of our society, not less. How do we, who are advocates for wild places and wild things, we look at that reality, we accept it, we accept all the changing manners in which messaging happens, and how do we create those people and give them some understanding of this is important? And it's not just important to say, oh, I want it to be there. It's important to know that we have a tolerance for it, that we're going to advocate for it.
Well, at the end of the day, that when it comes to that issue, I think the critical component is the habitat component. We can mess around with the numbers, we can move stuff around a little bit, but if there's not a place for it to live, and that's why I feel like there's so much wasted time and energy on conservation matters from people largely outside of the hunting industry the hunting community, whether it's an industry or a community or both. People who are outside of that, who spend millions and millions and millions of dollars to try and take hunting down because it looks bad, would be better served spending that money on working with local communities to help educate them about grizzly bears, to help preserve some habitat, to help make there wouldn't be a problem if there wasn't a struggle for space, right? I mean, if
right, it is a struggle for space, whether space for the natural world or space for the human world.
That's right. And so as we whittle it down, there's more conflict, and so why not spend the money on at least trying to engineer and help build and support and protect systems that have enough space, at least that we can reduce conflict to a reasonable amount and maintain our own healthy lives. I mean, if you continue to badger someone and spend all this money, it's like, you're killing because you're doing. Why? Let's fix the habitat. Let's let some animals live. Heck, if there's enough habitat, some make it. They don't get killed by humans. They die naturally, whatever. I mean, I could go on, but you see the point is that's where it's at for me, is the habitat. You lose the habitat, the only alternative or the only choice left is a forced choice of humans moving on in this world, period. End of story. Once the habitat's gone, it's not like it's going to be gone forever. It's going to be gone until we get done screwing it up, and then it'll recover. That might be in 5,000 years. Some people, Armageddon's next year. I don't know, but it will come back. So I have hope that even if we screw it up, but I don't want to, that's not
Right.
the trajectory we want to be
Exactly.
on. Right?
For me, I want it to be in greater abundance. I want even those who don't connect themselves in a daily basis like I do to that natural world. I want them to appreciate it and understand its complexities and understand that they are having an impact on that, no matter how many steps they want to go to try disconnect themselves from that responsibility, that kind of blood on your hands. You know, they like to say, oh, you got blood on your hands. You damn right I got blood on my hands. Everything I do, I have blood on my hands. Everything I eat, all the energy resources, all the fiber, I am responsible for the death of animals.
Yeah.
But that's what motivates me to be so engaged in habitat and conservation and land protection and everything else, clean air, clean water that those places need. And the challenge for me, and probably for all of us, is how do I communicate that passion, that importance to that person who they're now 5 generations disconnected from it. And
Well,
I don't have the answer, but
stories, you know, that's
story. No, I think you're back to your point, Tony.
Yeah.
Whether it's a story about public land, a story about what this means to you, what the natural world means to you, we all have that story to tell. When you said that last night, I wish I would have had the video rolling, because when you said every one of you have a story to tell and you can tell it, there were lights going on in the minds of this audience, and I'd never heard it said that way before. But now I'm going to steal that from you. I don't know if I'm not stealing your image. I might steal your idea, but I want our audiences to think about, what's my public land story? What's my story of connection to the wild places and the wild creatures? And tell that story. Make it important. Communicate it to those who are disconnected. Because if they're your friends, they'll at least feel some level of connection through you. So,
yeah, no, I guess I have to be, to sum it up or to close it up with that concept you're discussing. I think I kind of, I don't know if I borrowed it or if I want to take a little credit for it, but I got to give Shane Mahoney credit for that too.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, we came to that conclusion a few weeks ago when we were together at the Professional Outdoor Media Association conference where we were talking about this, and it's sort of like collectively came to be that we have to tell stories.
Right.
And so, you know, everybody there gets credit for it. Everybody who's analyzing this very, very important and sophisticated sort of problem that we're dealing with, that is responsible, I think, or who should have credit for. So it's yours, it's mine, it's all of ours. I mean, just do what you got to do.
Yeah. Well, folks, we could go on and on. We hardly even got through the sheet of notes here. But Tony, I really appreciate you taking the time. I know you're busy. I know you got to be somewhere this afternoon, and let's keep talking about this stuff. I love what you're doing. I love your work for the Professional Outdoor Media Association. You guys are doing great stuff, and thanks for being the advocate and the volunteer that you are.
Well, likewise. I mean, you're a leader in this element of outdoors, and I think people are. It's sort of like you were country before country was cool. You know, you're kind of out there doing it, and people are starting to look back on this and go, wow, did I leave them or they left me or whatever? But whatever the hell he's doing, I want some of that. So
Well,
I appreciate it.
Thank you, Tony. I appreciate that. And folks, thanks for listening. The next podcast you hear might be recorded live from a mule deer hunt on a big, tall mountain down in Utah next week. So thanks for listening. Appreciate it very much.